How to invent a religion.
I always knew you had to be willing to die to even do this job.
Can't stop what's coming. Executive orders.
The creation and the maintenance of a secret government within our government.
Is something wrong? With what? With anything?
I feel like you want to rip your face off.
There's something wrong with anything.
I was so spun.
What's the most you ever lost in a coin toss?
The law of the jungle, sir.
The most you ever lost in a coin toss?
You don't know what you're talking about. Who said it?
I said it. You don't know what you're talking about.
Suppression of unrest and dissent. Domestic anti-terrorism.
I don't have some way to put it. That's the way it is.
All right, Internet denizens and creatures of the night, you know the ritual. It's Tuesday. It's time for Blackballed with Rollie Quaid right here on revisionmedia.org. Tonight I got a special guest night. You might even have heard of him before. It's no other than Richard Kary. Richard, how you doing?
How you doing tonight, Rollie?
I'm doing super well. I called you onto my show tonight to actually talk about this platform we have right before us. I've had several guests on, and I think the narrative has been lost on some people because there's so much free thought on this particular network. Tonight, I want to talk about what is revisionmedia.org. Is this your brainchild? This is something, your pet project, and I want people to know who the owner and operator is and not confuse it with just another talking head on this network, but you're the guy that actually created this platform. Is that right, Richard?
Yes, that is correct. I had been a journalist on 2 platforms prior to this over the last 3 years or so, and it seemed like the natural evolution, but I tried to walk the line between focusing on the content, talking points that I think are most important, and having a free speech platform. That means that some hosts may focus on things that I don't think are as important, or, have some opinions I don't agree with, say some things I may think are incorrect even. And as for callers and guests, well, even more so. You will hear multiple opinions. But I do want to, for the most part, seek out and bring together like-minded people whom I think are looking out for humanity in the right ways. I guess that's the best way to put it.
It's kind of hard to get a read on the guy from watching his YouTube videos or reading his article. I think this platform that we have right here at Vision Media, 2-hour podcasts, it's not the same as sitting down with somebody and talking for long hours with them, but it's pretty damn good, to be able to flush out and pick somebody's brain for 2 hours. Where did you first learn about talk radio, and what influenced you to do this type of entertainment or media, or should we call it infotainment, where it's really just, it's information plus entertainment?
Well, as far as the information, the research, I would credit as my earliest influence William Cooper and his book, Behold a Pale Horse. I didn't initially see myself going into journalism. I just wanted that information for my own benefit. And as I looked further down the rabbit hole, I, considered other people along the way when I got into an era where I was more interested in topics in the independent media. In my mid-30s or so, I checked out, as a lot of people do, Alex Jones. It's a lot of times a necessary stepping stone in the process. but I, well, became familiar with a lot of talk radio. Looking up personalities I would hear from interviews, places like there, wanting to get a little better vibe than just that 5-minute segment and hear a full hour or two of someone talking about their views. So doing searches for names, of some guests I'd hear from that or similar shows, little more, little beyond, but not too alternative, not too independent media. Some of them pretty controlled, but nonetheless, I would pick and choose. And I mean, there are a lot of platforms I could credit. A lot of people have encountered RBN. I still check out RBN, Republic Broadcasting Network, and they have a lot of good people there, some of whom had originally interacted with Jones early on. I also could credit Red Ice Radio with Heinrich. That was a place where I got to know a lot of good names. There were a lot of interesting guests who came through there. Get a lot of noise from your end, Rollie. I don't know what you have going on there.
That's strange, because I got my microphone muted on the jack side.
Well, it's muting.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, I will do it from the switchboard from now on.
Sure.
Richard, I got a question for you, because the first time you interviewed me was January 2018, and we were at a platform called Renegade Broadcasting, and you interviewed me about Bill Cooper and where I learned about him from, but I never heard about where you heard about him from. For me, like, the first time listening to Bill Cooper is like the first time kissing a girl or listening to the Beatles or falling in love. Or, this guy, Militia Man, did all these great podcasts from a shortwave radio, straight up pirate radio. And he did it on the same microphone, the same dynamic microphone that was used to record Michael Jackson's Thriller, if you believe that trivia or not. Where did you hear about Bill Cooper from? Did you hear about it from a friend, or do you remember it all?
It was a close friend, actually, a gentleman my age I had been growing up with. I knew from school and from a band I was already in. I was the vocalist, he was the guitarist, and we spent a lot of time hanging out, chatting about things, and a friend of his came across this book, heard of the author's story, and I guess one thing led to another, where he decided to buy it from him. I don't know why he didn't want it anymore, the friend. But I guess it was
sometimes
originally
you just want that $10,
Yeah, this was a used copy from a thrift store or used bookstore or flea market, something like that, where it just came to where it was, encountered these different people by chance, for them to be talking about it, my friend to buy it, bring it over, and introduce it to me. I saw the significance and not only borrowed it to read chapters, I photocopied entire chapters, which I thought were the most important, because I didn't know how easily the book could be obtained. I didn't really even try initially. It just seemed like it was very unique material, and specific chapters at least, I just photocopied straight out, dealt with it like that. And for years then I had gradually had that information build in my knowledge base, and seeing so many things come to fruition since then, things that this man had predicted, is very sobering, to say the least. But I do remember when it was when he was introduced to me and a lot of what he had been through. I remember it was just hanging out at my parents' home with my friend, him coming over and talking about this amazing book that he just picked up.
The 90s were an amazing time to grow up in general. Granted, we didn't have these killer video games that we got now and these smartphones, and I can't even imagine a time without YouTube, but it was very interactive, like having a friend. Like, you depended very much so on people's personality to entertain you, and people were more engaged with each other. They were better communicators back then. And I remember that Bill Cooper's book was very much in circulation, and you could buy it at a kiosk at a mall, for example, especially in New York. You could buy it on a street corner. They were selling it everywhere. This book, Behold a Pale Horse by Bill Cooper. And it's just amazing that it took a naval man, he came out of naval intelligence, to really relay to the world this concept of a one world government and all the events in this earth, all the wars, all the war on drugs, for example, was all a product to cause globalization, even the war with the Soviet Union. What better to corral people all together than say, you got to choose Team Russia, the Soviets, or Team America, the team of freedom. And every nation has to make a choice instead of just putting out one nation to say, you join us or die. There was a team effort going on with it. And I couldn't wrap my brain around it when I first heard it, the concept of a one world government. Who would want a one world government? What type of people? Not people like me. And then to remove myself from the equation. Wait, there are people that don't think like me and have different agendas and different things that they want to implement on us, and they don't like us at all. And another thing that Bill Cooper relayed to me that I would have never thought about before was the concept that nobody's going to save you. There's no Messiah going to come down from the clouds and rescue you. And you're not worth saving. You got to do it yourself. And there's no room to be a sheep, or a sheeple, as he would call you, in this particular narrative that he created. And I would have never got anybody else to talk to me in such a manner ever in my whole life if I didn't find Bill Cooper. There was no adult that could connect the dots like Bill Cooper that I would ever interact with in my personal life, because I could really see it, how people have been so pigeonholed and it's hard to crack the nut with these people, to get to the inner layer of that there's this shadow network out there and you're not part of it. You're not part of the big club, if it were. Did you ever hear about these concepts before you heard about Bill Cooper, Richard?
No. Most of what he delves into, I hadn't been introduced to from other sources. I mean, this was the very early 90s, and I was still quite young. I was born in 1976. So, I mean, when his book came out in 91, that would make me, like 15 or so. And it was at least a couple of years past that. It was introduced. Actually, I'd say about 17 or so, 16, 17 is when I was introduced to him. And yeah, at that age, I had not previously heard of a lot of these things. And it was a little hard to believe, even the one world government, the idea of it coming right away, us losing our rights, or rather the First and Second Amendment being as threatened as it is clear in 2019 now that they are. That wasn't as apparent then, from my experiences, the short time I had been around at that age and everything. I mean, I didn't see it could be possible as close in the future as he was implying, but now I see it. A lot of things are coming to fruition soon enough where a lot of people who tried to write him off as a nutter back then certainly would not do as well if they were to still try to now. I mean, there are some things he paved the way for, and I looked further into certain rabbit holes that he perhaps didn't go into too far. Some things he focused on I maybe didn't look into much after. I mean, he has a lot of content in there about UFOs and aliens, but more and more as the years went on, he said, even when I first put that in there, I couldn't be 100% sure of a lot of this information. I was compiling data from a lot of people and sources, leaving it there for you each to be your own final judge on it. So, but even more so later on, he even speculated that perhaps some of that could have been slipped to him to poison the well, so to speak, to discredit him if he's talking about UFOs and aliens a little too excessively. So give him some fake, supposedly classified government documents. Who knows? I mean, I suspect he may have been the original source material to inspire a lot. I mean, I don't know how much other similar documents to what he supplies in there have come out elsewhere, but you'll see a lot of these things covered. Even on X-Files, they're talking about EBE, the extraterrestrial biological entity that the government had for a number of years, was the basis for E.T., that film as well. And, both E.T. and it being mentioned in X-Files, that could have been influenced by the documents Cooper supplied there. I don't know. What were you going to say? I'm sorry. Rollie?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Whitley Strieber wrote the book called The Communion that Bill Cooper used for the particular book. And Whitley Strieber actually sued Bill Cooper for using his work in that book. And in a way, it implied that his book was a work of fiction, if you catch my drift. Because if it's true, you really can't sue anybody for propagating the same information that you have if they give you credit, right? That's not real plagiarism. He just used them as a source. Whitley Strieber, meaning Bill Cooper used Whitley Strieber as a source.
Well,
Okay.
Who is that again?
Whitley Strieber. He was a big guest on Coast to Coast AM in the 90s.
And then E.T., that came out in like 80, 81. But you have to wonder if whoever was influenced for that saw the same documents that wound up in the hands of Cooper, who released it in 91.
Steven Spielberg, who made that movie.
Yeah.
And
I question everything from him. But
about Steven Spielberg, he's a member of the National Exercise Division Board of FEMA, of all things. So he actually works for the federal government. And he made that film that we all know, that every time we think about the Holocaust, we think of Schindler's List. But it's interesting, definitely, Bill Cooper, going back to the UFO question, he doubted himself whether the UFOs were actually extraterrestrial or of this planet, meaning that there was disinformation to get people to realize that all this technology that they see before them is of this world, and the government is supplying it. Because he related, when he went to Area 51 and Rachel, that he saw a helicopter go inside of a cave, just disappeared. It went inside of a mountain, actually. It wasn't a cave. It wasn't an alien craft. It just was using stealth technology that we don't know about, at least as public knowledge. And Bill Cooper used to have this little adage that he used to say. I think it goes something like this: read everything. It was something like along the lines of read everything, believe nothing, unless you could prove it inside of your mind. Or listen to everybody, read everything, believe nothing, until you can prove it to yourself, whether it's true or false. That is the crux of what he used to say. And I never heard that point before, that you would read somebody that you disagree with. Most people actually feel that you should not listen or take in any information of your enemy, because by explanatory, like just by definition that he's your enemy, you shouldn't let him into your defenses, right? Like inside your mind, we have a defensive mechanism inside of our heads to feed out information that could change our world perspective, right? But Bill Cooper would say, embrace that. Like, listen to people you disagree with and see where they're coming from. And if you could find out where they're coming from, maybe you're wrong about your beliefs, and it could change if you're a strong enough person, or if you figure out exactly where they're coming from. It's kind of like knowing the roaches in your house, being an exterminator. It's easier to weed them out if you know your enemy's base of operations, more about them. Anything that you could figure out about your enemy, knowledge is power.
Well, that's why I think a lot of people debate each other on their opinion of Alexander Dugin. And, I mean, people talk about, drawing from and knowing, your enemy's tactics, just to incorporate that as well. I mean, I've heard a lot of people, at first consider some of these principles related to politics, like you look at Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, and then you look at Antifa today and see what they're doing, just to be aware of. But I don't think there's much constructive going on in the left these days. It's far less organized, but I mean, there is still a strict doctrine. Things aren't questioned in the hierarchy, very much in Marxist ideologies. But I would say that it's probably just a case-by-case basis, As far as Dugin, I'm suspicious of him, but I don't think everyone who studies their enemy is someone you can't trust necessarily. And so that's why I think some people look into these things. I had interviewed Daniel Freiberg, and he hadn't even been releasing the Dugin books yet when I interviewed him. He started that after that. It was like a year before Charlottesville that I interviewed Daniel Freiberg. But, I mean, at the time I saw him as someone who was just being open-minded. And I'm curious, if I asked him directly, if I interviewed him again someday, how he would explain, just how much Dugin seems to, be he seems to be dismissing the ethnic element in nationalism in a lot of his writings, a civic nationalism. And so I would like to question Freiberg on that, why Freiberg is publishing so much of this material. But it is good to know your enemy, and going back to Cooper and the independent media, people don't get it. They don't realize they have to be their final judge and jury, because they're so used to the corporate media where you have someone giving you all the answers, even with the right-left false paradigm in politics. They pick one side and they try to trust their leaders, no matter how many times they're deceived. It's the definition of insanity, to try the same thing again and again, expecting a different result. Trusting your leaders is like that. But I think that Cooper had the alien material out there for you each to just consider. I don't think he wanted the focus to be on that all that much. If you'll see, it was later chapters. He brought up the manipulative economic theories, which translate from electronics And that was one of the first chapters, actually. I mean, he found the protocols as well. It seems to be far more important. And when I mentioned rabbit holes earlier, that's why I also wanted to include about Cooper. Even though he didn't fully sell himself on the Jewish problem, as it is, he did see part of the way there. He was such a Christian in the sense that you kind of live and let live, I think, that he didn't fully consider the protocols, even though he included them in his book in their entirety. And there weren't that many copies out there, in their entirety accessible. It was still pretty significant for him to release the protocols of the learned elders of Zion in its entirety in one of the chapters of Behold a Pale Horse.
I'd actually argue that Bill Cooper religion was the Constitution itself, because as far as a Christian, he was more of a Jeffersonian Christian. Remember, Thomas Jefferson literally took pages from the Bible and ripped it off, said literally a God like this cannot exist, and tossed it right in the trash can. Bill Cooper would actually say that he only follows the red text inside the Bible, the direct quotes or the direct teachings of Jesus, if it were, and try to live his life by that the best he can. And he was at a Christian network for a part of his show, especially when he was doing Mystery Babylon series, and the people that he was trying to reach were very Christian, so he wasn't going to red pill too many people in that, and you'll lose people if you talk and linger on too much about religion. Especially people don't want to hear that. They don't want their religion attacked, and if you start attacking their religion, people are just going to cut you off. And I try to steer clear as far away from the religious issue as possible. I think that it's probably the most divisive topic ever, is talking about religion itself. And I feel myself, I'm personally not religious. I view myself as being more an atheist. I think that if you call yourself agnostic, that's a lazy man's atheist. But I have no problem with Christianity whatsoever. I think it is a great religion. It's peaceful, and I don't have problems particularly with other religions, except for Judaism acts more like a gang than a religion, in my opinion. And they don't have the same values and morals, even though Christians and Jews all say that they get their inspiration from the Bible, but the Old Testament and the New Testament is so radically different than each other. Like, for example, the Ten Commandments, Christians will say, and they have their Christian blinders on to this topic, that the Ten Commandments apply to all humanity. Thou shalt not kill. Well, Jews will say that only applies to the tribe. That's only for our people to follow. We're not supposed to steal from each other. For Goyim, that's a different topic. So I think that Bill Cooper, and this is starting to become a Bill Cooper show. We might need to start shifting back to revision media. But Bill Cooper, and
it's a necessary step.
Yeah, this is where it all started, for you and me, was Bill Cooper. But I think that when he first came on the scene, he didn't know about Zionism. And it took him a while. There was a particular researcher, Stanton Friedman, who's a ufologist, who reached out to Bill Cooper in the early days, even in the late 80s when Reagan was in charge. Ask Bill Cooper for your information. And he gave it to him. Bill Cooper gave where he worked and all his information, and he doxed him to the FBI, and Bill Cooper got his office raided. He was working as a community college as a photographer. He was teaching photography at a community college. Got fired. So Bill Cooper's now unemployed for making that mistake, reaching out to somebody. And Friedman himself, he's a tribe member. And he would always talk about the only way to counter the alien influence in our world is joining together in Zionism and humanity joining itself to fight off the alien hordes that are going to come from the sky or whatever, you know. And it's obvious that Zionism is a pivotal role of the New World Order, and you could argue that it's actually in the Bible itself. It's not art imitating itself. It's predictive programming, the Bible itself. And I would argue that, you know, religion itself is a source of information and entertainment itself too. But there's a lot in the Bible, and it seems like the global leader following a script. And the Masons always put the Bible on the altar with a square in the compass and the shape of the Star of David. And they do have an agenda and a goal, and is to finally get to the point where they could rule people and be the person that watches the sheep work the fields and the beasts of burden plow for them that they ride on, and they just kick back and relax and just watch. And it was written in terms of nomadic tribes, cattle herding. But now in this era where we're so connected with computers, there really is a big brother scenario going on. And we are so devoted to media, it permeates our life. It's all around us. You go to a gas station, the mainstream media is at the pump. I worked out at the gym. I'm trying to get away from the media. They have it on the TVs by the ellipticals and the treadmills. And that's the only time I actually listen to the mainstream media is when it's forced upon me, because I don't own a TV, believe it or not. And I don't have access to CNN usually, but when it's forced on you and you can't escape it, it's just right there in front of you all the time in the background, no matter where you go, the mainstream media. And the only type of free entertainment out there is government-run entertainment. But Richard, when did you ever get discouraged by the mainstream media? Is there a particular story that really stuck out at you that says, I can no longer trust CNN and Fox anymore? Richard?
Well, it was a gradual process. The more I became aware of counter narratives. So as far as just seeing one instance on television that was just a light bulb moment, not so much. Maybe later on something that reconfirmed and solidified things, but that would have been far later, where I could discern for myself, you know, with a lot of how things are presented and a lot of these false flags, for example, even the Charlottesville incident. You know, if you want to talk about things more recent, but as far as back then, I mean, I could already see, even from absorbing information from Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper, that there was a stark difference between the reality he was describing and what we are led to believe in the so-called mainstream media. It's not even that popular anymore. That's why I just call it corporate media. It's more descriptive. But it was a bit more popular back then, and the internet hadn't been up and running to the general public, being used other than academics and government at the time when Cooper released this information. So it was pretty significant. And another thing he focused on too much, since we're still just wrapping up a bit with the man, is the Illuminati. You know, he seemed to, I don't know if it was his Christian background, but he had a fascination fascination with the mysticism, perhaps, and mystery of these secret groups. And I don't know, I didn't think that was as important as something like, the documentation he had on the protocols, or even as seeing the future attack on our First Amendment, Second Amendment, these staged shootings he predicted so well. The protocols, though, are a big one. And I didn't see why the Illuminati, that was a thing I always had a problem with later on. He called out Alex Jones, so maybe later he saw how you don't want to focus too much on these things far after he released his book. But, that's something with Jones, too. Too much of a focus on skull and bones, Illuminati, all of this. So, I don't know. There were a lot of chapters with different topics in that book, but people have to realize with the independent media, you're going to have a lot of source material. Each person directs you to 10 other people and sources for a given topic. You have to take it all in, be your own final discerning judge and jury, but it's not going to be laid out for you. You find a bunch of credible sources separate from one another, perhaps, that all seem to support what you think is most likely. People don't want to do the mental work, and they expect it to all be like in the cartoons or big budget films where there's a clear, distinct enemy and hero who take care of everything.
The good guys win in the end of the day, like every other popular TV show that you ever watched. And the good guys win in the ultimate battle between heaven and hell. And there are people out there that believe that this world is actually run by devils and angels and God. And what can you do if you're just a human? If you're mere mortal, you can't defend against that. But I think that Bill Cooper actually focused on the Illuminati a lot, and he did. And I think a lot of people thought that studying an underground world, that the only thing that you'll know about this particular group is the things that they reveal to themselves. So, like, anything that I tell you about my secret society is what you know about it. And so it does get off to the point where you're wondering if this is true information about the Illuminati or not. But I think that Bill Cooper used it as a term, and he did, as a generic term for people that consider themselves the knowers of this planet, that think they're the only adults in this world. And it is that way. The elite feel that they've been put in the position because they got God's lucky seaman club and been the chosen people to run this planet. And they think that they're related to the boss upstairs, which is the wizard in space, Jehovah, the god of war and pestilence. And so they're the rightful heirs to this planet. And another thing is, you've heard of the name Adam Weishaupt, who founded the Bavarian sect of Illuminati. Mm-hmm. There was a courier boy that was passing on a message that he wrote, and when he was writing, this boy, who was a messenger boy, got struck by lightning on his carriage. And the secret police in France uncovered what was written, and it seemed to be identical to the protocols itself. So Adam Weishaupt, the founder of the Bavarian sect of the Illuminati, he wasn't the founder of the Illuminati, just the Bavarian sect. It was the elders. Do you get what I'm saying?
Okay.
So the writing of the founder of the Bavarian sect, Adam Weishaupt, was a person that was part of the council that was writing plans to conquer Europe and the world at large.
Well, that is...
His writing was very Talmudic, Adam Weishaupt himself. And he was commissioned by the Rothschilds, who is the Jewish royal family. So in America, we got the Trump and the Kardashians as a royal family, where in England, it's Harry and whoever else. So the Jews have the Rothschilds as the people that they look up to as the community patriarchs. So in Adam Weishaupt's writing, he talked about that he wished that he could poison the water and the air that we breathe, and people would be forced to take medicine from him, which is containing more mercury than that was put in the air and the water, and very sick, and seems to be under the influence of opiates when he wrote this particular literature itself, and very self-important and very dismissive of the common people. And the founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, who was a Jesuit, but I don't think he was a Catholic at all. He doesn't strike me as any sort of altar boy. I think it was just a position for him for power.
Okay, that's very interesting. And so, basically, that would be the main credit. When you ask about early influences as a journalist, I would say William Cooper got me on that road. As far as some of the places he didn't look into enough, I'm trying to recall. I mean, he predicted a lot of turmoil for the future, the attack on our Bill of Rights, and concern of martial law. He talked about the FEMA camps and really a lot of the abuses of the executive orders and just how much that had gone into excess, especially starting with George Bush, Herbert Walker, George Bush Sr. onward. It seemed to be significant because that was who was in office when he released the book. And since then, we have seen more of the same. I mean, Obama, of course, Clinton, but Obama certainly had his significant abuses of the executive orders as well. So, I mean, there were a lot of important things that got me on a lot of paths. And the protocols were definitely one of those. And I was actually in a very diverse environment on the first platform. I was on Truth Cat Radio. It was started by a gentleman who had been broadcasting previous to that on Revolution Radio. He started the station, one Stephen D. Kelly. And Stephen had previously been a civilian contractor with the CIA and NSA with his laser company. He made high-grade lasers, some of the best in the world, used for sights on a lot of weaponry. And he had been a contractor, civilian, as I say, for a number of years before leaving due to a change of heart, in what he was contributing to ultimately. And he wound up having a sour relationship, but with the government agencies from that point on, they don't like it when you suddenly don't want to play ball. They don't care what your reason is, come to Jesus moment or not. But he was always into guns and protecting yourself. Really, a lot of the same things William Cooper ascribes to is someone that Stephen appreciates, for that matter. And Stephen has his own focuses these days, which are not so much on all the weaponry and hanging out at shooting ranges or anything like that. But back then, when he was contracting with those agencies, he was. As far as what he did since then, he was a whistleblower, basically after his time, with those agencies, and wrote a book that was in 2012. And he did a number of interviews. I caught interviews on a couple of different platforms that he did, and I had been listening to his show for over a year or two, maybe close to 3 years, actually. I had enjoyed a lot of his content. So he was an influence as well, as far as being a journalist, doing shows. And I was right there, one of the first hosts he took on when he started his own station. And so I kind of had a very strong one-on-one sort of interaction with the station manager when I was at Truth Cat Radio, and I got to know Stephen pretty well. I still am in touch and on good terms with the man. He's a good guy. And so that was really not that long ago that I started myself actively working as a journalist. That was only 3 years ago. 2016 in the summer to now, we're the summer of 2019.
Where did you first hear about Mr. Kelly? Did you first hear about him from just a YouTube search, or did you hear about him from Revolution Radio?
No, from other interviews he had done. I heard of him from a couple of shows I like to catch a lot of guests on were the Richie Allen Show, which is an affiliate of David Icke, and also Red Ice Radio with Heinrich Palmgren. Actually, on that platform, it was actually a show that Lana with Radio 314 did with Stephen D. Kelly, but I caught him for a few interviews on the Richie Allen Show, and I got to know him through Facebook as well, as far as contacting him, but I had been, as I say, listening to his show. Once I heard those interviews for a year or so, maybe two, and then, got in touch really just through Facebook. He's pretty easy to get in touch with if someone wants to ask him some things or interact. I mean, I like people in the independent media who are willing to do that and not be as stuffy as those in the corporate media. Even though they might not be making the same shekels as those in the corporate media, the ego makes up for any sort of monetary compensation. That fame can be just as crippling and leaving one impotent if they aren't careful. So, you can be wasting your time in the independent media if you get too caught up in that, I'd say.
The media has an agenda. They seem to be all cloned from the same ultra prototype liberal itself because they're very much in a groupthink, and there is definitely a limit to how much information is stored inside of the attic that they have upstairs. And they do feel that they are superior than everybody else. And because they went through the steps, been through the beeline of becoming a journalist, they feel that they're entitled to being a journalist. And that somebody like myself who reads articles every day has no right to be a blogger, to be a to be a communicator of information, a distributor of content, that I'm supposed to just bow to them and their superior intelligence. And it's wrong, because these people don't know or are not even connected to what it's like to be a working person. Remember when the coal miners lost their jobs and they told the coal miners, well, learn to code. And so the coal miners, when BuzzFeed started losing their jobs, told BuzzFeed on Twitter, learn to code, because that plug has been drained, and just the cord was cut off for funding for BuzzFeed from the CIA or whatever three-letter agency was funding it. And it just bellies up. It can't survive without an NGO. And it was deemed politically incorrect by Jack Dorsey, the founder of Twitter, to tell journalists to learn to code, just to tweet that. That's hate speech. And if we know anything about hate speech, and Stephen Douglas Whitener pointed this out, there's no such thing as hate speech. There's only thought crime. To think something that's contrary to the mainstream narrative itself, to the establishment. And it's so revealing that you can't just go on Twitter and be an amateur, meaning somebody who's unpaid, or voluntary journalist, and still have that veneer of being the lifeblood of Twitter, because Jack Dorsey says that journalists are the lifeblood of Twitter. You're not part of the blue check mafia. And there's two classes of people: the people that are verified, certified celebrities, and then everybody else. And if you're not a blue checker, you're like the bottom. You're an untouchable in the hierarchy of the Hindu culture, which is the bottom feeders of society. And there is a double standard on Twitter. For an example, Donald Trump violates Twitter every day, like the standards and his speech, but they can't get rid of him because he's the president of the United States. He's the president of the free world. And nor do I think that they should ban them, but there needs to be a platform where you can't, and I think that I'm kind of preaching to the choir on this, but where you could do the same things that you could do on Facebook and still have freedom to speak your mind. I know Gab is a really good site, but it's very poor on social interaction. Facebook is such a better tool to interact with people, but with all these dirty tricks that they got on it, it's hard to reach people. You post in several rooms your website, only 7 people check it out. And there is a model of social engineering inside of Facebook where people feel that they're entitled and they don't really want to learn more about people that are on Facebook. They just come for their own gratification so they could get that dopamine shot that they desperately want of, hey, look at me, world. That time where your daughter asks you, Daddy, I want to do a cartwheel. Can you watch me? And she'll wait until you actually are looking to do that cartwheel. She could do it on her own, but she just wants that validification to think that somebody thinks that she's special. It's the same way with people. It's the same sort of mechanism at work. And the elites know this. Mark Zucker, he's a figurehead, let's face it. I don't think that he really runs Facebook for 1 second. But he's the face of the corporation. But he's aware of the tools that are being used against the people on his own particular platform. And he knows that there's an alchemy at work on these social media platforms where they're turning data into gold. And there's no such thing as privacy on Facebook. They sell your data. But not only Big Brother, but other nations, like, for example, China, Israel, and Russia. And these are the same people that will say, oh my God, Trump is colluding with Russia. He is literally a puppet of Vladimir Putin in a sense of a Tom Clancy novel, that he's just a sleeper. It's ridiculous that people would ever have that belief. and they know it's a lie, and they're still at the levels of power inside of our social media, and they control it, and they disseminate disinformation, and they say, well, we got to protect you from Russia. Whatever happened to American exceptionalism that American trolls could fight back Russian trolls? Let's go one-on-one on social media. Let's have a troll war, a meme war, if you were. Americans are tough. They can handle it. We're exceptional, right, Richard?
Well, it depends. I don't know. I mean, as far as memes, I hear a lot of conflicting views. I'm not someone who focuses on making them myself. Some people think that it's the best way to get things across to people with the short attention span people have these days, right?
Well, with memes, like, for example, if you make a meme and use it for an article, it can save you 2 paragraphs of writing, because we are visual creatures. 30% of everything we comprehend is visual out of our 5 senses. That's a big chunk of what we consume is visually. And people do have short attention spans. They did a study saying that the average goldfish has 12-second attention span. They applied the same study on humans, and they found out that humans have less attention span nowadays than your average goldfish, which is 8. And goldfish are notorious for having pea little brains with short attention spans. And humans nowadays have been so cut and damaged mentally. The hamster wheels inside their head no longer turn the same way that they used to. People have become dull. They've been softened up for the New World Order. They're not ready or prepared. They think that somebody with a badge is there to sit, like somebody qualified to do something has to be there for them to do something. For an example, I heard on the news that a lawnmower turned over on somebody, and people were standing around waiting for ambulance to come because they didn't want to pick up the lawnmower on this person that's screaming for help, because they don't have a badge, they don't have a license to help, and they don't want to be reliable for it to get sued itself. And people have been dumbed down to the point of idiocracy. That was a documentary, Idiocracy itself. It wasn't a comedy. And people need to realize, and we're not going to reach everybody because people were flat out made to work farm labor. Not everybody's meant to be a statesman or a soldier. It's true. Some guys are meant to be beta males. But to think and feel like a woman, it's not our nature. And these guys that are soy boys, they really don't think like women, because women are more in tune and smarter than men in certain avenues. Like, for example, my wife could find things faster than I can. But there is a limitation to women itself. They don't really worry too much about what happens outside of their home and that maternal nature. And there is survival qualities to that as well. Women can be carefree. Michael Corleone said that in The Godfather, but men can't. Men have to worry about the outer world and what's going to come into their inner world inside their households. And prime example of that is these all ages drag shows that Kenny Bartholomew has been protesting lately, and he's been a guest on my show and Thursday with Stephen D. Whitener. And it's going to affect your kids, because let's say like you got a kid inside your kid's class, like let's say your second grader's class, and he tells your kid, hey, on the weekend I go dance for dollars at a club. You don't think that's going to affect how your children view the world? And especially if you have a kid in your class that comes from a complete different world than your kid, he's going to, or she is going to influence the way that your kid views the world, because people tend to be conformists. They just want to blend in with the background that they're in. It's survival mode. Everybody wants to be a sheep. When you think contrary to everybody else thinks, whether you're wrong or right, signals go to your brain. You better conform to what everybody else is doing, because if you don't, you're going to be out of the pack. And if you're out of the pack, the predators will eat you. And Richard, it seems that we're on the top of the hour for the next hour. Would you like to take a 6-minute break?
Sure, that sounds fine, Rollie.
All right. Well, you're listening to Blackballed with Rollie Quaid. Our guest tonight is Richard Kary, the owner and operator of Vision Media. And we're going to talk even more about our network in the next hour. We'll catch you on the other side, and go ahead and get that snack. We'll be back with more Blackballed with Rollie Quaid.
How to invent a religion.
I always knew you had to be willing to die to even do this job.
Yeah, he's a psychopathic killer, but so what? Just playing him around.
What is the first and principal thing he does? What needs does he serve by killing?
Executive orders.
The creation and the maintenance of a secret government within our government.
Okay. I'll be part of this world.
You feel like you want to just rip your face off.
I was so spun.
Is something wrong? With what? With anything?
Is that what you're asking me? Is there something wrong with anything?
Will there be anything else?
You already asked me that.
Well, I need to see my clothes.
See if I'm closed.
Yes, sir.
What time do you close?
Now, close.
Now is not the time. What time do you close?
Generally around dark. At dark.
You don't know what you're talking about, do you?
Sir?
I said, you don't know what you're talking about. What time do you go to bed?
Sir?
You're a bit deaf, aren't you? I said, what time do you go to bed?
Somewhere around 9:30. I'd say around 9:30.
I could come back then.
Why would you be coming back with the clothes?
Can you say that? What's the most you ever lost in a coin toss?
Sir?
The most you ever lost in a coin toss?
I don't know. I couldn't say.
You can't see the eyes of the demon until him come calling.
Call it.
Oh, yes. For what?
Just
Well, we need to know what we're calling for here.
you need to call it. I can't call it for you. It wouldn't be fair.
I didn't put nothing up.
Yes, you did. You've been putting it out your whole life. Just didn't know. You know what date is on this coin? 1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here. And now it's here. And it's either heads or tails.
domestic anti-terrorism.
The law of the jungle.
Okay, we're back on Blackballed, Rollie Quaid. This is our final hour. We're talking to Richard Kary about revision media. And Richard, you actually produced and wrote theme songs to all the content on this particular network. What is the title for my particular theme song? Did you name it Blackballed?
I did, but not all of the music for the different host shows. No, only certain ones. You know, I have quite a few on there that are traditional music or just you know, something that is old world. Some
that's in the public
music
domain
from the militant variety, a bit perhaps. So it's not all, but for a few. Yours, the one you'll hear for my show, and when I do intermissions, those pieces are mine. I wouldn't I wouldn't want to take credit for others, but yeah, I did name that Blackballed after your show, but it was an excerpt from a longer piece. You know, this one, you know, we just heard here is slightly modified from a piece that's slightly longer than that, and so yeah, I just used the same name with a different subtitle, but I had been doing music for a lot of years. I mean, I had been aware of a lot of the ways we're lied to, you know, but I had still somehow, even in the entertainment industry, music industry, seeing how much it's fixed, you know, rigged. I still somehow held on to, at least in the underground music scene, a positive impression of what I could accomplish, what I would want to contribute to for a lot of years there. And I worked with a lot of good people. Worked more on writing and recording music a lot of the time and trying to get the right people with the right material. But I had varying eras of exposing it to others, performing a little here and there. I guess, though, that was one early exposure, aside from William Cooper's book, just seeing how much the whole entertainment world is of a facade to social engineer. And also, I, at an early age, was able to see the benefits of cannabis and researched that quite a bit and saw how much we're lied to in the pharmaceutical industry, medical industry. So I resented that even from my early teens onward. And so everything started coming together more and more as years went on. Eventually, as we were talking about becoming a journalist only a handful of years ago, really, actively. But a good crash course in radio, My specialty has always been sound. I guess my brain is wired more that way, so be it music or radio, I seem to lend well to focusing on that way of conveying information. But I have an interest in a lot of other areas, history, historical revisionism, for that matter. And we mentioned the Jewish element in society regarding the social engineering, and we talked about the protocols. That's certainly a preoccupation of my research as well these days. But I appreciate the metaphysical as well, for that matter. I'll find the dedication of the Gnostics, the mystics, the seers of any era, of any age, to be very valuable to the tribe. And that role is something I, could only hope to someday contribute to as I grow more in my convictions, my research. But I would say that the pharmaceutical industry is terrible. Anyone out there who still ascribes to it or its poisons really needs to look into just how corrupt it is. I would recommend a book by Gwen Olsen. That's GwenOlsen. And Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher is the name of her book. I really would stress that to anyone and any friends and family, everyone listening out there who doesn't see the way some of us do, just how corrupt and evil that whole industry is. And just the whole idea of synthetics and how it's not nearly as beneficial or in line with the body as anything natural can be.
No, Richard, it's amazing. Donald Trump in this era has declared opiums as a big hindrance on our democracy. Not exactly in those words, but the issue that we need to worry about as a matter of national security is opiates. And the thing about it is, you cut on the TV and you see commercials for Oxycontin and Percocets. And it's in almost every single household. You go to your grandparents' house, it's in their cabinets. And it's readily available for your kids. And it's so easy to access it. And the disparity is that the fact that people get so addicted to pain relievers when they can't get a hold of it anymore, they get on heroin, believe it or not. And they want to get people to not do anything else besides the drugs that the pharmacy prescribes itself.
Oxycontin. Oxycontin is the pharmaceutical of choice. It's so much more expensive than the heroin. Someone gets addicted to Oxy, and once they can't afford that, then they'll go to the street heroin. Isn't that usually how it is, Rollie?
Yeah, absolutely. And they want to get rid of anything that goes against what they want you to be on. For example, there's a war against marijuana. And if you really study it, it's the CIA and the war on drugs trying to cut out the middleman in that equation. And the source wants to be the primary drug dealers, the pharmacy, the establishment, something they can regulate and control. And I get it. I mean, it's not good to have everybody's drug dealers on the street corner selling illegal drugs, because there is an element of danger to that. And especially drug dealers get tense, and it's very awkward to go to their houses to buy marijuana, for an example, and you really can't trust them. It'd be so much better to go to a smoke store and buy it itself. And I know that people say, well, then the government regulates it, but I'm kind of, there's catch-22 with me with that issue.
I don't know. Rollie, my opinion, I remember an excellent interview with a farmer that was on Renegade Broadcasting a while back. A couple of interviews, I think, with this one farmer. He was talking about how there can be a lot of kickbacks and bribes even in the organic and non-GMO world of farming. You really want to get to know the farmer, buy locally. And I'd say everything that gentleman said translates to cannabis as well. I mean, I've looked into in the forums and everything a lot of opinions out there, including that of a lot of growers. And really, that's the best way to go, is to buy from a local grower who you actually get to know and vet out and trust. And you know that there are a lot of things that aren't even, I mean, aside from potential poisons with all the GMO elements and weed killers, a lot of this is grown outdoors, even for these dispensaries. And they're concerned about insects. They'll cut corners in that regard. You'll get all this crap sprayed on it. Also, even what is used to grow, to get large yield, some of these things are meant for ornamentals only, not for anything that's to be consumed. And even if it's combustible and you're inhaling the smoke, you're still getting part of it, and you'll get those chemicals, those toxins into you as well. So you have to watch out for a lot of that. Even a lot of growers out there who do it for themselves, some of them disregard that. I mean, there are a lot of popular products that are supposed to be huge growth bursts, It's targeted specifically at do-it-yourself cannabis growers. And these things are made, a lot of them are made for ornamentals only, not for anything that's for consumption. And, there's a big debate in the forums out there because of that. And, yeah, so I would stick on the side of, really, I don't really care if it's legal or not, according to the federal level. I want the state level to be on my side at least, And I would recommend people get their supplies locally from, some old hippie dude who knows what he's talking about and isn't going to have any extra contaminants.
Well, another threat to the New World Order or the establishment itself.
Well, you're a little overload. You could back away from the mic or turn down the master volume there a bit. Yeah, it overloads when you get near it every time at first.
So the New World Order is worried about another substance that they want to put a Schedule 1 on. And it's in the same family as coffee, and that's kratom, which is grown in Thailand and other Southeast Asian countries. And they try to make it, and I'm talking about the experts, the people at the FDA and people that have definitely got money shoved in their back pocket, to say that this is a danger to society because heroin users are going to take a lot more kratom to try to get off of heroin than average user. But why is it always framed from the standpoint of just being a person that wants to try it to treat pain? They don't want people to take kratom, for an example, which has sedative effects and pain relief, they don't want people to self-prescribe themselves organic, natural things. And they rather take a long needle and shove it in your arm to stop your pain than to take something natural that's grown from the ground, that's organic, that's free of all those contaminants, that's grown straight from a tree and cut down, and you take it, and there's no bug spray ever or pestilence ever sprayed on it. And it's very disturbing that many states have banned it, and they're begging the DEA to schedule it as a number one in the same class as heroin. Heroin's bad shit. I don't know if you've ever known anybody that's taken heroin before, but it wears on your soul. It just corrupts you. It gives you demons in a syringe. It robs you of your own soul, of your essence. It makes you an individual. That and crystal meth, those are the two substances that just alter you, and you never are the same person after taking it. And heroin is an opium, and they're giving it to people just for pain relief. And I gotta think that it's no coincidence that they want to make people more docile with this, because that is an effect of an opium. Karl Marx said religion is the opium of the masses. Now they want to put the masses on opium to pacify them so that they'll accept the New World Order itself.
That's another thing I wanted to get into. Either that, or there'll be other ways people will be targeted as far as their dopamine receptors are concerned. All those hits you get with social media, it's been shown that can light up a lot of the areas of the brain that get stimulated, including releases of dopamine and other pleasure-related chemicals, jolts. And, this is an unnatural way to get, it's not in line with nature or realistic, But you'll have, of course, the same thing from these autopilot soldiers these days, You'll have these Israelis operating a drone from a comfortable room that's killing a Palestinian, and they get that same rush, just like they've been conditioned to in the video games their whole lives, of that dopamine rush. Not too different than the Facebook user. So all of these things, just like the heroin, they prey on different ways they can exploit our own pleasure center. And overload of our chemicals, expulsion, production, influence.
Absolutely, down to the NSA, which the NSA gives Israel unfiltered information that they have collected from us. Call those that are targeted with assassination that are children fun-sized terrorists. Anybody who's a child that gets hit with a drone is considered a fun-sized terrorist taking out. And it does remove yourself to attack people from a command center. And in Israel, they've been indoctrinated to think that Palestinians are subhuman. Even the justice minister, the former one, who looks like an Olsen twin before they got all cracked out, I think her name is Sheikton or Sheiklet, called Palestinian mothers give birth to snakes. And that's something that I can't wrap my brain around. The fact that Jews can be racist because they perpetuate the idea of themselves that they are the authors of liberalism and democratic values. And us Europeans were not really the author of that because we tended to want more of a republic. Our government in the past has been more of a Roman Republican than a democracy, because democracies have always been proven to be very weak systems. They might actually be the worst system of government besides downright Bolshevism or communism, because they're so weak that they can be easily overthrown. In our government right now, that's run by tech, it's not really the same as back in Roman days, but it's the perpetuated the idea that democracy is a game of tug of war between the mob and the oligarchs, and with tech, the owners of the system are definitely going to win at the end of the day versus the mob. And we're just stuck with a mob mentality, and we have these devices that give us flight responses, and they home in on that, and they know what they do to people. These were systems that were made by nature to detect predators, fight or flight responses. And now we can't help but to go online and get these nerve centers, working and jolting, and it's making yourself a target. It's just putting yourself out there. The FBI has said numerous times in numerous statements that they could never make a profile as great as they can now until the admin of Facebook. So it runs contrary to why these systems are put into place inside of us, because I got to tell you, every day I think about deleting my Facebook account. I'm not finding people that I can relate to on there. Sure, I get thumbs up, but to be honest, I'm not really reaching out to people. I don't think that people that want to add me even know that I'm a radio show host or writer. They just think of my memes as being sick or something or cool, but they don't really care about the person or would even take the time to listen to a show, for example. And they're just there to get their own pleasure, their own high, and not really interested in making a community, because honestly, I think when Facebook uses the term community, they're talking in Orwellian terms. In an Orwellian sense, we're a community. In the backward doublethink sense of the word.
Your post goes against our community standards.
Right. You're a pariah if you put something contrary to the particular narrative that's put forth. And if you're not following the party line, you get excommunicated by the Pope of social media, Zucker the fucker. And he's a person that started out making Facebook when he hacked into a sorority and put up a bunch of girls' pictures that he got from where he hacked. And you rate whether you like the animal or the girl. And that's where Facebook really started. That was his first platform. So somebody who's very abusive to women hate him. The point of you pick the pig, which is hotter, the girl. And somebody who's very socially inept. I mean, we saw him in Congress testifying about Cambridge Analytica, which is his bread and butter. And he's not going to really do anything against because they sell your data. But he pretended that he was human during that whole entire proceeding. And he's just so awkward, like when he drinks water and not even sweat, not even blink. And he's the person that dictates how people are going to communicate with each other. And he seems like he's on the spectrum of autism. And he just lives in the portal, the black portal of his device, and spends 16 hours a day on the computer itself. And he has everybody else doing it. Not going out to nature, not exercising. Just be a beta male cuck on the computer. And all your friends are online and on the screen, but no real world friends. And it has gotten to a point where people are communicating with each other that never meet each other and meet even their spouses online. Even attractive people are doing that. They find out that I'm an attractive man looking for an attractive female, and I can't find a suitable partner regardless of, I live in a city with 1 million people. And we're depending on these systems for every aspect of our life. Even these department stores are all closing because people rather shop at Amazon. People order their food online and not go to the grocery store and get that sweet potato, that onion, and that little piece of steak. No, they order it and send it in a box and give it to you. And I think with Revision Media, we've been the tip of the spear at exposing and focusing on the social credit score. I've done a show on it. Steven's talked about it before. Our Thursday night host, the man in plain sight himself, Steven D. Whitener, the nosedive that we've been taking. And it does seem that we're reaching a point where people are just marching off and heading for the precipice. And you're screaming at them, you're going the wrong way, turn around. And it seems the liberals are farther ahead of the conservatives, but the conservatives are not that far behind whatsoever. And they're so desperate to just reach the end of the cliff and become lemmings. I watched a nature film about lemmings. Richard, have you ever watched the lifespan of a lemming where there's the group of them just follow the herd and they get to a point where their leaders are just misleading everybody else and running towards the edge of the cliff, and then 90% of them just die that day, yearly, and the ones that remain breed and make the big herd again just so they can do it again the next year. That's how people...
Wow, Rollie. Yeah, I mean, I live in Chicago, and that sounds just like this city every year. Honestly. A lot of lemmings.
You got a lot of tribal warfare with the blacks over in Chicago. I watched a documentary where a reporter went down and interviewed a bunch of guys in bandanas, and they looked like militiamen. And the type of weapons that they had were military grade. And there's no reports about, and I never heard any liberals advocate getting rid of the weapons from Chicago in particular. They just call it prominent areas, but they focus mainly on right-wing people that have weapons. But you see it in Chicago. I mean, there's certain places where you don't want to turn the corner too fast because you could get shot. They could light up your car, and it could be a 5-year-old kid with a 14-year-old that just shooting up your car.
Yeah, well, it's these staged shooting events that try to portray that lone gunman as the conservative, right-wing, far-right white male, always. That's more a myth as far as the gun problem and violence and killing problem than the actual reality. As far as Chicago, you go outside of the downtown area, yeah, you'll find some neighborhoods that are, a bit suburban-like and okay, little patches here and there. But, I mean, large amount of the south side is, just a crime-infested, dangerous black ghetto, too much like Detroit. And then the north side, near the lake, Lake Michigan, there's a huge sector of the city they're trying to make too much like San Francisco, in a degenerate sort of way. So take your pick, San Francisco or Detroit. You lose either way in Chicago. It's just a Zionist megacity that I really need to get out of at some point. But, yeah.
If you could jump ship, and I'm not talking about different state, where would you go if you had an option to leave this country?
Oh, well, I mean, we cover... I mean, I as a journalist and here on the station, we cover more and more material where I'm not sure I'd feel too welcome, in less and less countries all the time, Rollie. I don't know about that. I'm happy with our Constitution and Bill of Rights here, and that is, just about the best thing that you could still testify to about the United States of America. And I am someone who was born here, and with those recognitions of inherent rights that I am born with, no one grants to me. They're not privileges. They're
inalienable rights.
Yes.
Ones that are not made to be questioned.
They're
bestowed upon you.
They're not bestowed. They're
endowed by the Creator. Whatever you want that Creator to be.
Yeah, so I don't think much about traveling elsewhere the more I delve into a lot of these subject matters in particular. But definitely the Southeast looks promising. I mean, I'm not saying that people who live in the mountain time zone, aren't perhaps making a good choice for them. I do like the Southeast more and more in recent years in a lot of ways. That's all I'd say.
I can't believe South Carolina, which has the Confederate flag hanging over the Capitol, would implement such laws as it's illegal to boycott Israel.
Well, that is something. Go ahead.
Try to gut BDS, which is not a terrorist organization. It is just an organization saying, let's put economic pressure on Israel because it is mistreating Arabs and taking land from the Palestinians. Palestinians are not going to have any sort of statehood in the future with this deal of the century that Trump has made. It's just going to get rid of Palestinian identity and give them malls, maybe even a better life. I don't know. But there'll be no such thing as settlers anymore. They'll just be Israelis. And 40% of the land that the settlers are just going to be taken away from the Palestinians, which is their indigenous land. They were there before the Israelis. The Israelis left the Middle East and mixed in with other races and came back and declared that this is our land. And there was never a statehood inside of Israel whatsoever.
Right now, archaeologists are trying to prove that some secret city of King David can be confirmed through some sort of artifacts. Once again, trying to lay claim to the land and providing some quotes from some of their leaders saying, the 4,000 years we lay claim, makes the Palestinians' claim pale in comparison. They want to reinforce the biblical claim. And actually, genetically, the Palestinians would be more related to that land. At this point, you have such Khazarian straying in the nomadic aspect of a lot of the people who make up lay claim. I know that there are multiple, there's Sephardic and Ashkenazi. So the Sephardic may have some blood more than the Ashkenazi, but the Palestinian, you could argue a lot of things. As far as the land itself, some question the Israel of the Bible ever existing in geographic terms, as far as the Jews' claim to it. I know a lot of people get into this, but yeah, right now they're trying to have archaeologists claim some secret city of King David that he fled to or something. Is able.
They do a lot of secret tunneling to not just the Palestinians to bring in basic supplies, but the Israelis. The Palestinians have actually reported that they could actually plant artifacts, and when Vice is good, they're the best, but when they're bad, they're the worst. But Vice TV had a documentary that they did was outstanding. It was about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. And in this documentary, it talks about Israel actually planting artificial sites inside of Palestinian territory, meaning planting artifacts inside of a field and say, oh, this proves that this farmland that you've had for God knows how many generations actually was a part of the state of Israel. And now we're taking over your land because it's Israeli land as promised by the Bible to the God of Abraham. and this is no longer your homeland whatsoever. And it's appalling that people don't wake up or don't even care, maybe because they feel the Jews are the patriarchy of the Bible itself and related to the boss, as I mentioned in the first hour. And there's just Christian blinders to the fact that humans are being mistreated.
Well, we have just more and more reinforcement by the Jewish-controlled corporate media these days, trying to beat it into your heads more and more of what they always try to survive on. You know, these claims of anti-Semitism, persecution, bringing up the Holocaust, they're trying to make it mandatory right now. Israel is trying to make it mandatory in the U.S. for all children in all schools to have Holocaust social engineering. They call it education, but come on. We know it is a hoax. It didn't happen. There was no extermination planned or carried out for the Jews. There were work camps, and they were an issue. The Jewish element, which had such a devastating effect, why Hitler was praised, and they called it the German miracle. You know, what he did to turn around the country once he came to power. So, I mean, anyone who looks into the Jewish element in history, and in a lot of countries for that matter, can see a pattern and can see a lot of things you really can't deny if you really take the time to look into it. But they want you to have just an impulsive reaction without thinking. You know, oh no, that's anti-Semitic to go there, to look into any of that. No. It has to be this way. Oh yeah, the Holocaust, just like we were told, you know, and that's what they always use on us. But I've actually, in 2015, became familiar with Dennis Wise's The Greatest Story Never Told. He made it the year prior to that, and I was blown away. He has so many sources cited in there from so many people and in different publications, pieces of documented evidence from all different countries as well, for that matter. And there's just so much, which he very much tries to present in an unbiased form of data collection, much like William Cooper. But yeah, I can't help but definitely, that was one thing that definitely brought me to understanding what the Germans and Adolf Hitler were doing back then, you know, as opposed to the lies. And that was a rabbit hole William Cooper never got into completely. And a lot of people don't look into that rabbit hole. But it was something that
97 got into the number of 6 million Jews could not exist. Bill Cooper always thought that it was much, much lower, like less than 1 million that were killed during World War II.
Oh, yeah.
We acknowledged that they were labor camps as well.
I heard a lot of theories, and I knew all of this should be questioned. Even at an early age, I always questioned what we were told about the Third Reich and Hitler. And it was something early on. I remember as a band name in my teens, I liked the idea of Führer Initiator, because you're questioning the forces that initiated the image of the Führer, perhaps not even the actual man that existed, who existed, but rather this portrayal that is being sold to us with a purpose. I was skeptical and heard, even in William Cooper's example there, like you mentioned, people questioning. It really brought it home for me, though. So it wasn't until 4 years ago, that I really seriously was no longer, afraid of what people thought of me or whatever, because I knew an amount of information that showed and backed up what I had already been seeing about just how countries are manipulated and everything fit, The Jewish element, I had been seeing that more and more. And finally, everything came together. But I mean, everyone has their own way of approaching a lot of these things when they become a journalist or are trying to be an activist in any subcategory we've discussed here tonight. As far as my personal aspirations with revision media, to make sure we cover that, I mean, I do, like I say, think there are certain things that should be focused on the most. I had a lot of care in people I've met over these past few years, as far as individuals I've appointed as hosts, including yourself, sir. And yeah, I definitely give a lot of thought to someone who's contributing here as far as that's concerned. But free speech and people being able to disagree a bit is healthy. And I think it shows that we're real here, and we're not some sort of a cult where anyone disagrees with something a little bit and you can't work with them, you can't network with them. That's not a good way to go. But as far as my learning about the lies we were told about history, that partially influenced the name Revision Media. Revisionism, World War II revisionism, and historical revisionism of the wars and history in general is an important topic, and really it applies to all subject matter. I mean, I read Mein Kampf as well in that same era of being exposed to Dennis Wise's film in 2015, and that definitely solidified my revision of the impressions I had of Adolf Hitler as the man. And I see why he was Time Magazine's Man of the Year twice now, confirmed, I'm told. And also why it was the German miracle, what he did to turn the country around economically. But, I mean, I had, after Truth Cat Radio, since I didn't finish that whole story, I was at Renegade Broadcasting, overlapping a bit, actually, with Truth Cat Radio. But there are people at this station now who have been on various platforms, either a host on Truth Cat Radio or on Renegade Broadcasting, or a guest of mine on one of those platforms. As far as my parting from the second platform there, Renegade Broadcasting, they do a lot of, they have worked with a lot of topics and done a lot of good on getting information out there that's important, on a number of topics, had a lot of good guests on. I don't want to say bad things about them because I don't think it's productive to focus on. I mean, it's cliche, don't punch right, bro, but at the same time, there's some truth to it. And I hear a lot of good people who've been around a lot longer than myself, including an excellent gentleman I have on as my guest tomorrow, who talk about this. And so, I see there are some places we could go. Maybe the listeners are curious about some differences or the way some things turned out the way they did. But unless I had a direct question or call, we could just move on to, I don't know, what do you think with the remaining minutes about revision media we didn't get to, you think is good for us to cover tonight, Rollie?
Yeah, I wanted to get into talking about a long-term plan and make a German miracle right here and now. To work about new strategies to implore to get the message across. I was thinking about this. You're a musician yourself. What if we reach out to local bands and people that are unsigned and ask them if they would like to play one of their songs, one time only during the break, and that way the listeners could listen to new music and we could actually introduce the particular band and the song. What do you think about that idea?
Oh, it's a curious idea. It's something we definitely could consider, in future. It's just that I know a lot of musicians and artists, for that matter, don't always like to cross into politics, with their music at least, they might keep them separate and delve into each or contribute, but not necessarily mixing them for varying reasons. I do find that is the case with a lot of musicians and artists. So considering how political a lot of what we work with is, we're kind of controversial. So I don't know, but it would be an interesting thing to consider. I think we had a caller join us as well, Rollie.
Yeah, we got no other than Johnny from El Paso from Liberty Light News. Johnny, do you have a question about our network, revisionmedia.org, about the formation of it or the origins?
It was more of a compliment towards both of you gentlemen. I just wanted to just compliment you before the end of the show as to what Richard does and you as well, Rollie. In the beginning of your episode, you guys were talking about William Bill Cooper and all these other people that got us down this road of being a truther. I just want to say I think it's very important that you guys touched upon the topic as to Richard being almost like the torch carrier of sorts. He's passing on the torch to the new generation. He's trying to bring people together. And it's okay if we agree to disagree sometimes, but the important part is that people are staying together and being active and being cordial. So I think it's very important. As such, we've all took maybe something from other people and independent media, that it's important that these platforms stay open. So I just want to say thank you to Revision as well. That's awesome stuff.
Well, thank you, Johnny. That's an excellent statement and something that I can stand by as well. And I'd like to add to the way artists and musicians will keep politics separate from their work. I think that is something, though, which does conflict around the media and religion, spirituality as well. I try to be open to people of different beliefs, faiths around this station. I don't like pressure in an environment toward, what you should eat or who you might worship. You know what I mean, Johnny?
Sure, I totally agree. And that's where I believe it's very vital that you have these open platforms and people come together. You're just passing the torch, and I think that's what people are. We're always talking about the government having control over us and all this. We cover this at Revision when I call in, or you guys have shows. You guys are always talking about this. But I think it's important that if we're going to take a stand on this, we have to come together and self-manage ourselves or be the judge at the end of the day, like you said in the beginning of the show. Because if not, government's going to slowly implement itself, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of everybody trying to see amongst their differences. So I think it's important that you have this open dialogue. So thank you so much for Revision, both of you.
Podcasts are really popular. I mean, it's the new age right now. And I'm really surprised that you can't go to Best Buy and tell them, the man behind the counter at Best Buy, can I have some software to make a podcast? They really want you to be steered towards using social media like Facebook and YouTube. Have you guys noticed that at all? Like that the fact that you have to figure it out yourself to make your own platform and learn to code versus making it simple, in this culture that we're in right now where everything becomes more simple, so less thought is putting into it. But, I mean, have you guys noticed that at all? Like, it's kind of difficult and you have to be very tech savvy to actually make your own platform.
Well, I'll just briefly comment and pass it to Johnny, who's in the tech world as well, but I've been working with sound engineering for decades now, and I've just recently been getting into the web development. But yeah, I do see how they want you to be on a platform that they can censor you, ban you, take down your video, block you, like YouTube or Facebook. They like having that control. They want you to just upload to them and be ready for their Orwellian move whenever they feel is right. And it is important to empower yourself to learn these skills, all of us to be able to have just a non-localized network, keep the internet that way as much as possible, but also the way we provide information and make it available, keep it non-localized like that as well, and as much that we can control ourselves. Definitely, I mean, I think companies like Intel, which is now totally controlled by Israel, and
their R&D is in Haifa.
Google, you know, this is such a front for the controllers, you know, the powers that be. And definitely Judaism is used as a weapon in this tech world. But Johnny, what would you say? I don't know about Google and Intel in particular, or any of what I was commenting on.
Yeah, I concur. When it came to Rollie's question, it's really about just knowing what equipment you need and then mastering that equipment. So it's kind of one of those things. But as you mentioned, if you were to get led into, say, a tech store, I mean, you ask them, like, hey, they wouldn't know. You know, it's kind of like they don't know. They say they're tech, or they probably do know, and I don't know how they use that or view it. You tell them what you're trying to do, and then they judge you or whatnot. So, yeah, it's very judgmental. And then the tech world part of it, I would agree that it's ever evolving. And it's really, that's how they keep us in control, is by controlling the narrative. So we got to fight that. We have to be vigilant. I agree with that.
Fight the NSA, fight the Mossad, all of Big Brother and their minions out there, right? But, I mean, this is definitely, when I bring up the Jewish element utilized, I mean, all the hate speech justifications, you know, and anti-Semitism and all this, even for things that are completely unrelated to Judaism, you know. I mean, hate speech against immigrants or LGBT or blacks or whatever. They'll always bring back, remember the Holocaust and people being persecuted. It's justification, you know, for whatever platform.
Shutting down the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, trust me, you guys have made me come around as well as to being more lenient towards the history of German history. So I think it's true. For example, before we go, right now you see people licking ice cream. It's like, wow, you're licking ice cream, you're ruining it for everybody. And then if you talk about anything bad or about politics, it's like that has to be controlled as well. It's like hate speech. That's hate speech. It's like there's always something to make another law. And people don't understand when you dub people as hate speech, or you go out and do these moronic acts and record yourself, you're just asking for more bigger brother government. And then you want to blame the government for taking all your taxes because you did it to yourself. But they use the tactics against us. It's reverse engineering. And they're doing it at a high level when it comes to media.
Absolutely fascinating points. You know, where the rubber meets the road is where journalists fail. There's a problem of mentality, and our perception is built on crunching raw data from what we observe every day. And if you're force-fed, trivial, nonsensical stories every day, you know, if it's like the old adage, you are what you eat. If you eat junk food, you're going to be pure junk. And there's absolutely a whole society that has been eating nothing but junk food and getting false information. The chickens are coming home to roost. And I'm worried about people not being able to think logically by themselves, and to think that if you go to the store and ask the guys at Best Buy, do you guys know anything about podcasting? And their idea is doing live streams of them playing video games. You know, that's more what they're interested in than actually sitting and talking for a couple hours off script. And I just think that this platform, or Vision Media, is so important. And it really is the pirate radio of today. And I got to give a round of applause for Richard for making it and letting this medium live on, of doing live radio And you don't have to have a license to do so. You don't have to go through the B line. You don't have to be cloned from an ultra-liberal prototype in order to do this. You could be an individual. You have a different opinion. You could actually literally argue with me on my show. If you ever want to call in a Blackballed and tell me to give my sources. Yeah, right. You know, where are you getting this information from, Rollie? I've had people actually tell me that I depend too much on the mainstream media and not going 4chan enough. But I try to give my best analysis that I can, and as people, we're only given a rough estimate, and we do our best with what we have, the tools that we have. And I do live in my own planet. I mean, what I surveil is what I perceive. And is reality a construct of the mind, or is there a definite reality? I don't know. But I am in for this long ride, this on Revision Media. I'm in the back seat of the car, Richard at the driver's seat. And I'm just going to evolve and maybe even have different opinions about various things, but we'll all grow together. And it's great that you want to be part of this, Johnny, and I really appreciate Richard for making this platform, but we're past midnight, and some people have to go to sleep, and we do have to worry about our listeners. And I'm going to wrap up this show right now. Richard, do you have anything else you would like to say?
I just recommend each of you out there maybe find a couple dozen independent media websites that you fancy for one reason or another. Keep up with those. You know, maybe listen to a few radio platforms such as Revision Media, but definitely keep up with a good variety of sources. They don't have to agree 100% as we say, because you are that final judge and jury. But thank you, Rollie. I had a great time tonight.
Johnny, would you like to say something before we wrap up?
No, not really, man. I just want to say God bless to both of you. Good stuff.
All right, audience. As everything has to come to an end, even a good thing like Blackballed and Rollie Quaid. We'll be back next week, same time, same place, and you've just been Blackballed. Have a good night, folks.
How to invent a religion.
I always knew you had to be willing to die to even do this job.
Can't stop what's coming. Executive orders.
The creation and the maintenance of a secret government within our government.
Is something wrong? What? With anything?
I feel like you want to rip your face off.
There's something wrong with anything.
I was so spun.
What's the most you ever lost in the coin toss?
The law of the jungle, sir.
The most you ever lost in the coin toss? You don't know what you're talking about. Good son. I said, you don't know what you're talking about.
Suppression of unrest and dissent. Domestic anti-terrorism.
I don't have some way to put it. That's the way it is.